The Holy Gospel according to John, the 10th chapter. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him, because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers." Now Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but those who were listening didn't understand what he was saying. So again Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The Gospel of the Lord. I have a peculiar relationship with gates, at least over the last 4 or 5 years or so. I've never kept sheep or any livestock for that matter, but I have had very small children, and they also require gates, at least if you live in a house with stairs, which I always have. I remember with my oldest, Ethan, we had all the gates set up at the top and the bottom of every set of stairs, and it wasn't too long after he learned how to walk that he also learned how to climb, and very quickly found himself climbing over the very gates that were there to keep him from falling down the stairs. Now, if that weren't enough, we discovered very quickly with our twins, with Grace and Lily, that they also have a very peculiar and very good way of getting around gates. You see, they discovered first that the easiest way to get around a gate was to ask their big brother to open it, and he would happily oblige and open it up. And just about as quickly as we could teach Ethan not to open the gate when the baby asked, they learned how to open it on their own. I still remember the first day we got our big new set of gates for our twins. It was not just a one that kind of fit in between, where the stairs go, but it was a large set of gates, and it could create this like 8-foot by 6-foot pen. And we thought this would be perfect in our living room. We filled it with all of their favorite toys and got it all set up, and the girls were so excited they ran right inside, and as soon as I closed the latch on that large gate, we heard the screams. Less than 10 seconds of use we got out of that giant pen. They immediately found and tried and did everything they could to get out. Eventually, we ended up using that large set of gates to not just, make a pen for them, but to wall off the living room so that everyone in the living room would be inside the gates and therefore safe. I don't expect that I'm the only one who's ever had this problem with small children and setting up gates and barriers only to have the kids zip right over the top one way or another. And it's a little comforting to me, at least, to see that when Jesus talks about gates, they're not there as some kind of impenetrable barrier. Jesus talks about these gates, and clearly people who want to get in can get in, and many times the sheep who want to get out can get out. It seems like when Jesus is talking about sheep and gates and where they're supposed to go, most of the time it's the story of a lost sheep, or in this case, of people who aren't supposed to jumping over and getting in. You see, I think, at least for Jesus, these gates and these walls and these barriers aren't there as a separator necessarily, but as something that teaches the sheep, that teaches the people who they belong to and whose they are. You see, when you set up a set of gates, when you set up a set of barriers, whatever they might be, Whoever is there on the inside has this innate sense that they go with that person, that they belong to that person, that they are connected to them, and the one who is setting up those gates cares for them. At least I hope that's how it works. My kids seem to be okay with that idea. This sense that these gates are there not just to keep people out or to keep people in, but to claim ownership, I think is really important. That's, I think, what Jesus is talking about as he's telling this story. It's not as if we follow Jesus, everything is going to be fine, that nothing bad will happen to us, that we'll always be safe and secure in our tiny little pen. But those gates are there to show us who cares for us, to remind us again and again that we are God's children, that we are being cared for day in and day out. It doesn't mean things that are bad won't happen. It doesn't mean something won't come in and disrupt our life. It doesn't mean that we won't have the chance and the temptation to jump the fence and to run off. But it does mean that when those things happen, we have a God that will round us all up again, that will call out our name, that will find us and bring us back into the fold. Now, just yesterday afternoon, I had the pleasure of being the host for a very special Zoom meeting. This was our confirmation kind of finale for the year. And we have 10 confirmation students who are being confirmed, and they would have normally today in worship been confirmed, and we'd have a special ceremony, and their parents would, place their hands on each of their kids as the pastors go along, and as they recite their confirmation vows, the same ones their parents made for them in baptism. Well, we can't do all of that, but we still had each of these confirmation students give their kind of traditional presentation. We do this almost every year, and each of these 10 students get a chance to share with each other and with the whole congregation a bit about their faith journey so far. Something that has been important to them, something that tells kind of the world about where they're at, how they are thinking about God, and where they think God might be leading them. And it never fails. Every year we do this, I'm always blown away by the creativity, by the diversity, by the amazing stories that each of these students tell. And this year, for some reason, what stuck out to me was a number of different people talking about a moment where they had been hurt. Maybe it was something that happened in their family where they had a family member in the hospital for a long time. Maybe it was just a physical injury. I think one of them was a skiing accident. Another, in sports, someone dislocated their hip. And they had a number of weeks where they had to rely on other people, where they had to be the one receiving care from a community. And again, these students talked about how important it was to have a community around them, to have a community in their families, to have a community in their neighborhoods, and even especially to have a community in their church. They talked about how important it was that their other friends from the Genesis youth group or from the church at large would care about them and ask them how they're doing and send them cards and check in on them. And there's this sense that we're all kind of in this same sheep pen. And it's not that we're never going to get hurt. Clearly it happens again and again. But that when something does happen, we have this community of people around us. We know to whom we belong. We know we are all here as children of God. And it gives us a chance to see God at work in the people around us. To see God at work in neighbors that drop off meals, in friends that write get well soon notes, in communities that care and check in and ask how people are doing. And that brings me to the very last part of this gospel lesson, the very last bit, and it says that Jesus is talking. He says, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. I love that verse Because I think just like this idea about the fences and gates, the first thing that pops to your mind when you think abundant life is probably not what Jesus is talking about. If we imagine abundant life as, living it up and traveling the world and having all of the things we could ever want, that's pretty clearly, I think, not what Jesus is saying. If you look at what Jesus calls people to do, if you look at Jesus' earliest followers, the people who followed Jesus, who listened to what he had to say and tried to live in that new way that Jesus was creating, they didn't have what I think many of us would call abundant lives. Many of their lives were cut pretty short. They were all pretty much poor. They didn't get a chance to travel the world the way we imagine traveling the world would go. But what did happen was they went around and they shared this good news. They shared this story that says Jesus is alive, that death has been defeated, and that there's a whole new way to live into this world. There was this sense among Jesus' earliest followers that they were doing something brand new, that they were following Jesus into this new world. That living abundantly didn't mean having all of the riches and doing all of the things the world said you need to do if you're going to be successful. In fact, living abundantly simply meant following Jesus' example of caring for the people around them, of caring for those who are most in need and most vulnerable. Going out into the world and caring for those who are most in need. For Jesus, that's what it means to live abundantly. I imagine if any of us were asked 3 or 4 months ago, what would it mean for you to live abundantly this summer? What would it mean for you to have your best life this summer? What would you do? What would happen? Almost none of us, I think, would say, I'm going to stay at my house and stay inside for months on end. And yet, what we're doing now, what each and every one of us is doing, in fact, for the first time, what the entire world is doing right now, is giving up whatever we might have had planned. It's giving up and making sacrifices in our jobs, in our daily lives, in our plans for the future, so that the most vulnerable and the most at risk among us might have life. As strange as it might seem, here in this time of coronavirus, we are all, in one way, following Jesus' example, giving up those things that are important to us, giving up the plans and all of the things we might have done through this summer and through this fall, in order that those most at risk might live. That's a powerful thing. It's not what many of us would think about when we think about living and having life abundantly. But it's what Jesus calls us to do in this moment. It's what Jesus has always called us to do. To give up our time, our talents, our possessions, and in some cases, yes, even our lives, so that those on the margins and the edges of society might live. This isn't easy. It takes more than just a single person to get this right. It takes a community of people gathered together with one mission. And this community of people, when we know that we belong to God and we know that God has called us and claimed us, every once in a while, we get a chance to be the hands, the heart, and the feet of Jesus in the world. We get a chance to go out, to care for those most in need, to give up those things that we might think create abundant life. And in giving those things up, we see that abundant life comes from serving those around us. None of this is easy. But we have a chance now to work together, to be all a part of the same flock, an entire world united under this call to care for those at the margins of our society. We might not always get it right, but in those moments when we do, we get a glimpse of what Jesus calls abundant life for us and for the whole world. Amen.